from the surprisingly sunny Copenhagen. Welcome to the eTraining Enhancing Energy Efficiency in East Africa, hosted by the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. This is the second session. We had the previous session on 16th of March. My name is Aris. I'm working as a program officer at the Copenhagen Center, and I will be the moderator for today's eTraining. A couple of things before we move to the main content of our eTraining. This eTraining is going to be about 90 minutes long, including time for Q&A at the end. In case you cannot stay until the end or want to get back to our presentations, all the materials and the recordings of the whole eTraining will be available online in a few days on the Copenhagen Center's knowledge management system. And we have many other webinars and training material and information over there. Have a look. Now, before we start discussing our today's eTraining, I would like to inform our attendees that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. This means that your personal data such as name, email, workplace, etc. is safely processed and stored, and all of your rights pursuant to the GDPR are respected. We have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time you can request that inaccurate data be deleted or rectified. For access or further information, please contact with the people that are presented here. Now, a few things about the Copenhagen Center. The Center conducts research and advisory activities in the field of energy efficiency and serves as Energy Efficiency Hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The Center has an established network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy activities. Now, I would like to briefly introduce the speakers of today's eTraining. Clara is a postdoctoral researcher specialized in the climate-conscious transformation of the building sector. Jorge is working as a senior economist at the UNEP-BTU partnership, who has worked more than 18 years implementing projects in developing countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And finally, Rahul is a senior expert at the UNEP-BTU partnership. His role involves identifying short and long-term technical and financial potential of energy efficiency implementation measures. As we would like to know a little bit more to better understand you, our attendees, we prepare a poll with a few questions. We would appreciate if you could respond to those questions so we have a better know about you. Do you know what energy audit and energy management is? And yeah, I have two options, yes or no. So I'll give a few seconds and to try to find out what do you know about that specific topic. So thank you very much for your response. And let's say the response, and since that's overwhelming, we have 76%, they know what an energy audit and energy management is. Thank you very much. Let's go to the next question. So the question is, does your building, firm, organization have energy management system? And as always, you have two options, yes or no. So let's see the results. And here, 61%, the majority said no. So thank you very much. Let's go to the next question. And the question is, does your building, firm, facility, organization get energy audits done? So your options again is yes or no, and I'm going to give a few seconds to respond to that poll. Thank you very much. So let's close this poll and see the results. Okay, the majority, the response to that question was no. The final question is, does you as an individual or as part of a team conduct energy audits? And the options again is yes or no. So let's see the result of this poll. And it seems that 58% responded no, but also there is a significant amount that 42% respond to yes. I think these are very useful results for my colleagues, which I hope they're planning to use it in their research. With that, I will like to inform that you can send us your questions during the presentations using the dedicated icon, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end, where we're going to have the Q&A session. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. That will make it a bit more easier for us to identify who from my colleagues who should speak.
So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Jorge Rogat.
Thank you very much, Aris, for the introduction and for the poll that you just ran, which I think is, like you said, very useful for all of us. Good morning to everyone. I hope you are all doing very well. Unlike me, looking forward to this second day of the course, which I hope is as interesting as the one we had the first day. During that first day, my colleagues introduced energy efficiency and the existing potential in the East African context, and in particular for the municipalities of the East African region. They presented also potential measures and policies that could be used in order to improve energy efficiency in the region. And as I said, they highlighted the importance of having a well-developed energy efficiency strategy plan, may it be medium or long term. This is important for the municipalities so they could outline their objectives and targets, and thereby design or plan actions or projects that could be implemented to achieve these objectives or targets. So it is quite important or very important for municipalities to spend some time on this. In my session today, I will present the project bundling approach, which can facilitate to achieve these objectives and targets and facilitate and even accelerate energy efficiency improvement interventions or projects in the region. So let's move to next. As I said, my session will focus on the so-called, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the project bundling approach, but essentially, I mean, as you know, increasing the number of energy interventions, energy efficiency interventions is very important. I mean, it's quite important that we can increase globally, not only for the East African region, but globally, the number of interventions aimed at improving energy efficiency. And as you know, I mean, doing this, they will contribute to achieve the sustainable goal number 7, which is ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, under which the energy efficiency global rate of improvement should be doubled by 2030. It's quite a target, but it's important to be achieved. The good thing with this is that this will lead to less energy consumption, which is obviously good for the environment, both local and global, due to reductions of CO2 emissions, but it will also lower energy costs, which is, of course, good for the municipalities, since it will mean a reduction in their budgets. So this is quite important, as I said, and there are a number of ways. You will see 2 or 3 slides here that you saw yesterday, but they are a little bit modified here, so not really a repetition. There are a number of ways where energy efficiency improvements can be achieved. One is the building sector. You heard already this morning a question about the building sector. And it may have significant implications when it comes to energy use. When it comes to buildings, for instance, insulation is one of the most important aspects. And as you can see here, there are estimations that the heat gain or heat loss through windows are responsible for 25 to 30% of residential heating and cooling energy use. So there is a huge potential for energy efficiency improvements in most of the sectors, I would say. Then you have another sector, for instance, is street lighting. Simply by replacing incandescent light bulbs by LED lights, for instance, you will achieve savings of up to 90%. And the good thing with LED lights is that they have an energy efficiency rate which is much higher than incandescent light bulbs. And we are talking about moving from 35% energy efficiency rate from incandescent lights to a rate of 80% approximately by LED lights. So, and besides, they last up to 26 times more than conventional incandescent lights. I'm showing these pictures here. The two to the right are actually from Argentina, and the reason I'm showing them is that the last day of this course, we will have a presentation from Argentina, from the network Ramsat there, where they have actually replaced a number of lamps by LED lamps. Interestingly, the picture to the right is actually from an area outside Buenos Aires called La Boca, and is actually where, I mean, is the home to the soccer team Boca Juniors, and home also to the soccer player Maradona, that you may all know, just as an anecdote. There is here, even in street lighting and public lighting, a good potential. There is also a potential in the water supply systems. As you may know, in many places there are leaks from pipes, from plumbing fixtures and fittings, and they can be significant. The losses from this can be significantly reduced by regular water loss management and repair, for instance. So there are a number of things that can be done in order to improve energy efficiency. Now, the question is why this has not been done, or why, the energy efficiency interventions are taking off. And there are a number of reasons that can be mentioned. One of them is that energy efficiency projects typically constitute small investments because they are developed perhaps on a small scale level within the municipality, which makes the investment quite small. Another one is that the traditional financial sector many times lack knowledge about energy efficiency projects, and that's why it's difficult for them to fund or finance projects. Multilateral development banks have high transaction costs, and therefore small investments or small loans are not very attractive for them. And another reason is that small municipalities many times don't have enough credit rating, which makes quite difficult for them to have access to funding and financing. So, we could see all these as barriers to implementation projects in energy efficiency. But these barriers need to be overcome if we want an increase in energy efficiency projects or interventions. However, now it comes the beauty. There are actually possibilities or approaches that can be applied in order to overcome these barriers. And one of these is actually the project bundling approach, or the aggregation of projects. I will be using these two words, aggregated and bundling, interchangeably. They are more or less the same, but just for you to know. Then, what is project bundling or project aggregation, as I said? Is the creation of a structure through which a number of small-scale projects, it could be in various sectors, in various energy sectors, that can be aggregated or bundled into a large-scale project or intervention. In this approach, you will standardize. There is a standardization of the various implementation components of a project or a certain intervention. The standardization may include the aggregation of different components such as design, pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, contract negotiation, search for funding, and implementation. So, as we can see here, all these components can be aggregated into a bundled or aggregated project, which will make it much more attractive and which will give it a number of benefits. Which are these benefits? And how can this approach, so to speak, accelerate energy efficiency improvements interventions? For the first, it gives rise to economies of scale, as you can understand. I mean, instead of having 15 or a number of small interventions on projects, you can aggregate all these into one high or higher scale or larger scale project. So there are a number of economies of scale in all, more or less in all the components in the project design and implementation. It can be applied to multiple energy sectors, as we showed earlier, buildings, including heating, cooling, and lighting in the buildings, may it be a public building or a commercial building, street lighting as well, water supply systems, transport, and other sectors that could, for instance, the infrastructure sector that could be as well use this approach. So many sectors, energy sectors, that can be applicable, so to speak, in order to use this approach. It facilitates experience exchange and knowledge between municipalities, because as I will show you later on, when municipalities go together, they aggregate a number of projects, they will be implementing one project with similar experiences, and they will be exchanged among them. That will provide sort of this experience exchange. It enables access to high-level technical expertise, and this because whenever you have a mass or a larger scale project, there is a tendency that technical expertise will be more attracted to that compared to working with a small scale project. It raises the investment level, making it more attractive to donors, development agencies, and private investors. Like I said before, whenever you have a small project that requires limited investment, because of a number of reasons, transaction costs that all these multilateral development agencies or financiers have. So having a larger investment will make it more attractive for them. Now I will show you, as we have suggested, 5 key steps for doing project bundling. As you can see, the first step is the generation of project ideas, which is supposed to emanate from the energy efficiency strategic plans of the municipalities. And in this context, it's quite important that municipalities collect or gather all the required information and data about energy plans and priorities, which are in line with, for example, the nationally determined contribution, NDCs. Being in line with these national plans and priorities will, of course, increase acceptance for the planned action or project or intervention. So this is also very important that, there is a connection. Indeed, this first step is also very important to establish an energy efficiency baseline, because this will tell you whether you are moving in the right direction when you are implementing the project, whether you are making progress or not. And this is something that, of course, all the financiers and development agencies are interested in, because they want to know whether your project is moving forward, is worth investing in or not. So also that quite important. The next step is assessment of project investments. And these include preparation of project ideas, pre-feasibility studies, and feasibility studies. Here is quite important that it's quite important to map local capacity to conduct the necessary assessments. Like I said, pre-feasibility and feasibility studies. So the studies are well done. In case this capacity is not in place, it's quite important that a capacity building component or a training is put in place in the very beginning. So the development and design of the project has a solid base. The third step in this approach is creating of bundle project for investment. Now, to aggregate project of similar kind, the creation of a specific structure to be the main bulk procurer, and borrower will be needed. So in this sense, is quite important that this is also properly included in the project design. Finally, the fifth step, infrastructure investment in the project bundle. Here, it is important to structure and present the project proposal in a well-structured way, which will make it easier for financiers and funding organizations to screen it and analyze the potential of the project, which will obviously affect the decision whether to lend the money or to finance this a certain project. Many times, financiers need to struggle finding data and indicators that can make this process easier, the process of judging the project potential. Is it worth investing it in this project or not? So this is a very important step in the project bundling. And as you can see here, this can be done by a municipality. Assume, for instance, a municipality wants to replace the LEDs in different areas of a city. Instead of developing one project in each of the cities, which would be a much smaller scale project, instead of doing that, the municipality could aggregate all these projects and develop only one larger scale project. So this can be done by a municipality. But, I mean, this can be also done by a number of municipalities. Assume, once again, that the number of municipalities, in this example, 3 municipalities, want to improve insulation in a number of public buildings or commercial buildings. So these municipalities could go together and aggregate into one larger scale project. And this can be done, for instance, by using a so-called special purpose vehicle. This is something that has been used, as you also will see in the presentation from Argentina. This SPV has been used in Argentina for the replacement of LEDs in a number of municipalities. So the process is more or less the same, but here you will have this SPV that will be representing and acting on behalf of the municipalities that have aggregated a project. So the SPV will be communicating and interacting and coordinating between municipalities, between banks, other private equity investors, but also with multilateral development banks, international financiers, and other credit providers. So this will be a sort of entity, you could say, or a company that is established for the specific purpose of, and whose holders are the various small project owners, for example, a municipality mayor. So a municipality mayor could be represented in this SPV as representing one of the municipalities. Another example could be using ESCOs, energy services companies, as you may know. They essentially act as a project developer as they integrate a series of components of the project. But I will not go into more into detail to this, because this will be covered by my colleagues in module 4, where you will see business models and financing possibilities for bundling projects. Here we can see the same 5 steps that I have mentioned before: generation of the project ideas, assessment of project investment, creation of bundled project for investment, the bulk procurement, and infrastructure investment in the project bundle. All these 5 steps are the same for one municipality or for several municipalities. The difference here is that I have added, if you see to the right, the way our organization, C2E2, can support municipalities in doing project bundling. C2E2 can provide guidance on best practices because we have experience, we have done that before. We can connect to partners, network sources. As you know, we are an international organization that have been networking more or less with all the countries of the world. So we have a wide network of partners. We can support to assess on ideas scoping, because as I mentioned before, emanating from the action plan, you will prioritize a number of actions or projects in order to achieve the target set by the municipality, right? So you may have several project ideas, but still you need to sort of narrow down and perhaps go down to 1 or 2 project ideas. In that process, we can help to assess the ideas scoping. Also, we can provide templates for project ideas. As I said before, financial institutions and development agencies many times struggle to get in an easy way the required information so they can assess whether the project is worth funding or not. Or if the project has a potential of really improving energy efficiency. So there are templates for project ideas that can be used so they can be much easily be screened by these organizations. Project feasibility assessment, we have already provided assistance in conducting pre-feasibility and feasibility studies in many countries. We can help to select eligible projects. As I said, many may emanate from this energy plan, but you need, of course, to select a number of eligible projects, estimate the size of the bundle and its impacts the action may have, assist in the preparation of the bundle as well, assist with tender preparation, which is also a process that needs to be well prepared, and the development of a procurement strategy, because for that you need as well a strategy that make the process easier. We can also facilitate the disbursement of funding for infrastructure development, not the funding itself, because as we have already said, I think before, we cannot fund directly, but we can facilitate the disbursement of funding that normally is coming from other agencies. And we can provide a so-called MRV, which stands for Measuring, Reporting, and Verification Framework. And this is quite important also, once again, for the financiers, because at the end of the project, you should be able to show that the project that you have implemented has achieved the expected results. And this you can only show if you have a structure and establish an MRV approach for the project, and you do it from the very beginning. Because as I said also before, here, I mean, you start with the energy efficiency baseline, so you know, okay, where we are when we start, and then the MRV system at the end will tell you, okay, we have achieved this or we have not achieved this. This is good in the sense that if you want to replicate projects, it's quite important or very important that you can show that this project was worth investing in. And that will facilitate, of course, accessing funding for coming projects. So this is more or less the essence of the project bundling approach and how can it be sort of developed and how we can also assist or support the countries in doing the project bundling. More information, more detailed information about the project bundling, you will also find in the source book that I will show you next slide, where we have one component on, or one module, so to speak, on project bundling. Once again, CO2 experience relate to project bundling. I mean, we have been working with small and medium-sized cities for a number of years. We can assist, I think it was mentioned by Gabriela the first day, we can assist in the data collection and analysis process, which is, once again, is key for convincing financiers and providing them with the right or the information they are looking for. We can, of course, assist in the doing of the project bundling itself, the steps and how to do it in the best way. Financing and public purchases, we can help in that process as well. Investment and installation, and finally, as I said before, the establishment and design of this MRV system that can document at the end of the project, or even before that, it can show the progress the project is making, but at the end, it can show whether the objectives, the set objectives and targets were achieved or not. So I think more or less that was in a very summarized way the project bundling approach, and I'm showing again the source book that we have produced, where, as you can see, module 2 deals with project bundling. The first one deals with strategic planning that was covered yesterday with by my colleagues, Charlie and Rahul. So please visit this or our website, and with this link you will have access to the source book that we have prepared, which is both in English and Spanish so far. Maybe translation to other languages may come later on. So with that, Aris, I'm done with my presentation, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for your presentation. Now I would like to give the floor to my next colleague, Clara. So, Clara, I've seen you ready, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aris. So, and also thank you to Jorge for this excellent presentation, but also very sleek overview of the different topics that we will be addressing during this e-training. I hope it was interesting for everybody. And I welcome you now to the module number 3 of this e-training. And the objective of this module 3 is to share insights on the key aspects on energy efficiency in buildings, with a special focus on municipal buildings. The overall session will take around 17 minutes, and we will start with a theory block on the status quo and energy efficiency potential of actions of existing public services and commercial buildings, which will take around 20 minutes. The second block will be dedicated to describing a bit more in detail energy efficiency potential in the building envelope of buildings. Again, this will take around 20 minutes. And then the final block, third block, my colleague Raju will cover energy management and audit for buildings. And this again will take around 20 minutes. Last, we have reserved a Q&A session in which you will have the opportunity actually to raise any questions or comments. And this will take around 10 minutes. We've reserved 10 minutes for that. So this said, let's get started with the content, starting with session 3.1, the status quo and energy efficiency potential actions for commercial buildings. Now, let's start by addressing the query why. Why do we need to take action on buildings? Well, buildings and building construction sector, as was mentioned earlier from my different colleagues, from Jorge and Gabriela, combined are responsible for over 1/3 of global final energy consumption and nearly 40% of total direct and indirect CO2 emissions. Furthermore, the energy demand continuously rises in this sector, driven by improved access to energy, a greater ownership and use of energy consumption devices, along with a growth of the global building floor area. Currently, out of the around 50 million tons of CO2 emissions that are generated globally, energy use in buildings, for instance, residential buildings, account for 11%, which mostly come from the generation of energy for heating and cooling, domestic hot water, as well as electricity for lighting and appliances. And in terms of commercial buildings, they represent around 6.5% of the global emissions. And these are, again, energy-related emissions from the generation of electricity, lighting, appliances, heating and cooling. The next question I would like to address is, again, a why question. Why the focus on energy efficiency? Why should we implement energy efficiency measures in buildings? What is the energy and respective CO2 emission saving potential that we can expect from these interventions? Well, as you can see in this figure from the baseline emissions, energy efficiency can derive in around 25% of CO2 emissions. Savings in building appliances, 10%, lightings, 5%. So a total of 30 to 40% reductions can be expected on buildings due to energy efficiency measures. And that is in many cases a crucial contribution to achieve the carbon reduction targets that are set on a national and transnational level. These percentages, of course, can vary based on the specific country, region, and or context the building typology is set in. Still, buildings are typically the single biggest contributor to CO2 emissions, and therefore it is crucial to address their energy efficiency in order to address this CO2 emission potential savings. Before we move on into the, let's say, the different energy efficiency actions and benefits of these actions, let us see what we mean by commercial buildings, because there's actually not an aligned official definition for this. So the purpose of this, for the purpose of this presentation, we will be using the one defined by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, the RICS. And according to them, the commercial buildings cover all types of real estate used for building purposes, business purposes, sorry. The principal sectors being retail, offices, industrial, and leisure. They serve a vast array of purposes, supporting both public and private sector businesses, such as government, service industries, education, healthcare, manufacturing, telecommunications, civil engineering. So we're talking about office building, retail chains, shopping malls, government buildings, stadiums, hospitals, schools, factories, hotels, restaurants, warehouses, etc. That is a very wide range, of uses, with the only exception being agriculture and residential use. And I have to clarify that for this presentation, I will be mostly focusing on municipal buildings, as I understand that might be the most interest for you, for the audience today. As was described in the first module of the training, and Jorge also gave an overview earlier, in overall, energy efficiency interventions derive in benefits way beyond the energy and CO2 emission savings, such as improved energy security, more competitive energy prices, industrial productivity through enhancing competitiveness, profitability, and production, poverty alleviation by supporting increased access to energy, saving in public budgets through lower energy bills, increased disposable income through lower energy bills, asset value increase, etc., etc. Now, how does this translate or pour in terms of benefits of energy efficiency interventions for commercial buildings? There's a number of them again, and I'll just highlight some of the most predominant ones. Well, these kind of interventions can reduce equipment operation and maintenance costs, extending also, in turn, their useful life. Depending on the specific case and framework conditions, this might be a way to adapt equipment and facilities to current regulations. Energy efficiency can also ensure that local air pollution is reduced and also promote the use of renewable energy, such as photovoltaic panels. The various plans and works needed to upgrade the building can also lead to job creation by the use of human resources to design, execute, and monitor these works, and even create new know-how and craftsmanship and competitiveness, as we mentioned earlier. In the case of health conditions, this can be improved through the air pollution reduction as well as indoor air quality can be accessed through the energy efficiency measures of these buildings. And last but not least, when it comes to municipal buildings, it is a way to lead by example. Such actions can even improve the image of the municipalities by promoting awareness with the environment and energy efficiency progress, as well as helping to acquire experience in such projects, in energy efficiency in projects and buildings, and test that the necessary framework conditions that are needed in order to undertake such projects are there and are acting correctly. In a nutshell, energy efficiency measures in commercial buildings can be a means to support the local economy and social development while attaining environmental goals. Now, what are the energy efficiency measures that can be implemented in commercial buildings? In fact, there are many types of measures that can be undertaken. A way to cluster them is through the types of systems that they entail. So passive systems, active systems, or any other generic improvements. Passive systems are those related to the building components that do not require energy to operate. Active systems, on the other hand, are those that will require energy to function or operate. Generic improvements do not respect any particular technology or system, but can also improve the energy consumption of the building to a very large extent. So it's very important to keep them in mind too, and even start with them, as we will see. As for the passive system, some examples are efficient skins, minimize or maximize solar gains depending on the local weather conditions and the use of the building, capitalize on daylight, so use as much natural light as possible for lighting purposes, as well as making use of natural airflows as possible, as much as possible, and if possible or required by the building. Moving on to active systems, some examples are efficient lighting, efficient heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, that is HVAC systems, or other active controls like energy management systems. In terms of generic improvements, some of these potential actions are good energy consumption practices among employees or users of the building, proper maintenance of the facilities, as well as an adequate contracting of the electricity bill. I will now share some further details on each of them in the upcoming slides. But first, let me explain, although this might go without saying, that energy efficiency measures can be carried out both in new constructions as well as pre-existing or existing buildings through retrofit projects. In the case of newly constructed buildings, there might be a greater degree of freedom in the passive design measures that can be carried out, such as the orientation of the building to capitalize on daylight, or the amount and size of openings and windows, which was described by Jorge in his previous presentation, as you would have seen with the different diagrams very nicely represented. In fact, it is essential to introduce these energy efficiency passive measures during the design process in new buildings to obtain the optimal results at a lower cost, and also to capitalize as much as possible on the existing conditions. And in the case of pre-existing buildings, the energy efficiency measures must be adapted to the conditions marked by the already existing building. So one needs to take into consideration what are the amount of and positioning of the windows, what is the already existing orientation of the building, what are the already existing energy systems, if at all, so HVAC systems, if they exist, etc., etc. Existing buildings are the focus of the content I will share today. And with this said, both newly built and existing buildings through retrofit projects are becoming more and more spread in the world in all buildings, but also in commercial buildings, as in most cases, the investment is recovered in a very short period of time through energy bill savings and increased productivity, along with other associated benefits that I mentioned earlier. Now, having a closer look at the generic measures that can be implemented, first, I would mention a good energy consumption practices among employees or any other building user. That can consist on adapting the building use schedule to capitalize on daylight, turn off office equipment when it's not in use, create an energy management plan, as we will see later on in the session, closing windows and doors when the HVAC system is on, etc. Now, another very important element in terms of generic measures is the proper maintenance of the facilities, which will entail an up-to-date energy management systems, as will Rahul, my colleague Rahul, mentioned later on, the quantification of saving and investments in energy and energy efficiency, along with the regular maintenance of the facilities to make sure that the installations work at their best capacity, avoiding any unnecessarily inefficiencies. The knowledge management of the electricity bill is also a key component in all of this, such as the optimization of the contracting of the electrical supplies, making sure that the electric energy tariff and electricity tariff is the most suitable for the building use, or the use of computer tools for monitoring energy consumption, and also, if possible, connecting to district heating and cooling systems. Moving on to the building envelope, this is one of the most important components of the building, not only because of the skin function it holds, but also from an energy perspective. So a well-designed and executed building envelope based on the local weather conditions, or should be based, sorry, on the local weather conditions, construction practices, materials, and it will ensure that the building keeps the right temperature and level of humidity throughout the year. This includes a good insulation to the enclosure to make the thermal conditions inside the building stable, either from the cold or the heat from the exterior conditions, but also humidity. It also includes efficient windows and doors so that the heat or the cold does not escape through these openings, creating a so-called thermal bridges. And in the cases where the building is located in warmer weather conditions, the envelope systems such as green roofs or facades, canopies, parasols can really minimize the solar heat gains and use them in its own advantage. And in parallel to the temperature, it is very important to capitalize on daylight to save energy for lighting purposes. So this is to achieve through the orientation of the building, but also through other elements such as solar shelves, mirror ducts, as can be seen in the images to the bottom right of this slide. And this is just a very general overview. I will describe all of these elements and design practices a bit more in detail in the upcoming session. Now, as of HVAC systems, possible energy efficiency improvement measures are to install thermostatic valves in radiators, in the case of heating, of course, regulation of the air conditioning temperature, boiler replacement by a more efficient one, boiler maintenance, radiant systems, install solar thermal panels, again, if possible, connect to district heating or NOR cooling. But again, I won't give too many details on this because this will be addressed by my colleague Rahul in the upcoming session, Energy Efficiency in HVAC Systems, which has two parts actually, and you shouldn't miss any of them. And yeah, when it comes to lighting, possible energy efficiency improvements in commercial buildings are to install presence detectors in areas of sporadic or very low use, use of natural light by means of light sensors, lighting zoning, lighting with LED lamps, and replacement of mercury or sodium vapor lamps with LED. I will further discuss this on Monday with you, and yeah, I will also provide different tactics on how to really implement this in the most cost-effective manner. In terms of equipment and appliances, energy demand can be reduced through the use of multiple strips with programmable switches or plugs, variable speed drives and motors, high efficiency engines, more efficient elevators, for instance, can also be part of this, more efficient electrical appliances, among many other measures. Having said this, I would really like to stress three key concepts when it comes to energy efficiency buildings that apply to all buildings, regardless of their use, be it commercial buildings or not. Buildings, particularly when it comes to the energy consumptions, work as a system, like the human body, for instance. So all components of the system must be taken into consideration for an optimal result of the energy performance of the building. A single element, such as the windows, should not be approached without understanding how the overall system works. What we typically see is these so-called lock-in effects, in which people just address one building component or building element, such as the window, as I mentioned, without taking into consideration the whole building. They consider that as, okay, check, that is what the energy efficiency measure should look like in my building, and that is really not achieving the overall energy targets we should be, ambition that we should be targeting to. So it is important to have first this notion before delving more into the energy efficiency in buildings. Another key idea to bear in mind when thinking of energy efficiency measures in buildings is that they're case sensitive. This means that there's no set of energy efficiency measures that are ideal for every building in every context. In other words, there's no a single recipe that can serve all purpose, all buildings across every context. So it is very much depends on the local weather conditions, the use of the building, the local construction practices, and other resources such as the budget, of course. And it gets even more case sensitive when we're talking about existing buildings, as the pre-existing conditions, as I mentioned earlier, can really influence or even determine the actual energy efficiency measures that can be implemented in that building. In fact, for existing buildings, energy audits are a key first step, as my colleague will explain later on. And it helps to understand the energy performance of the building to afterwards be able to know exactly how to best improve it. And when it comes to new buildings, an in-depth energy performance study will be needed to be undertaken to make sure that is indeed developed based on energy efficiency standards. And third but not least, buildings have a long lifetime, and this has two main consequences. First, we should start by implementing energy efficiency measures as soon as possible, as retrofitting or upgrading energetically the whole building stock of a region, of a country, is really time consuming. And we really need to do this in order to achieve carbon targets, as I mentioned at the beginning. But it also takes it is important, and this is the other consequence, we should do it properly. It's very important that before starting this, we really study the different buildings, the different energy patterns, and we do this in a proper manner in order to avoid, as I mentioned, this suboptimal, actually very detriment locking effects. So with this, I will wrap up this first session. Let's recap first on what we have of all of the different concepts, or the highlights of the concept that have been shared. So worldwide, buildings are the single biggest contributor to energy demand and respective CO2 emissions. Energy efficiency actions can considerably reduce energy costs through the increase of energy savings. Many of these actions, in fact, are cost effective with very short payback times. Beyond the energy saving and CO2, energy efficiency in buildings and commercial buildings particularly can be a means to support the local economy and social development while attaining a number of environmental goals through a number of additional benefits. Many options are available to improve the energy efficiency of these buildings, from LED lighting to low-cost energy efficiency strategies, such as better utilizing natural light. These can be broadly classified into three generic groups, or three main groups, that would be passive and active measures, but also generic interventions. Buildings work as a system and they're case sensitive. All elements in this system need to be taken into consideration when addressing the energy efficiency improvements, regardless of the building typology we're talking about. There is no one recipe also that can suit all buildings, as weather conditions, use of the building, budget, and other available resources, as well as construction practices, all play a key role in identifying what are the optimal energy efficiency measures. In the case of pre-existing buildings, the concrete energy efficiency measures will also be identified or determined or influenced based on the pre-existing conditions. So all of these elements should be addressed based on an initial step, which is the energy audit of the building. And yes, in the case of new build, we need to make sure that we are indeed taking the right, most effective energy efficiency measures in our design based on the context and contextual conditions. Now, regardless of the climate and economic framework conditions the buildings is located at, energy efficiency measures can indeed be cost effective with very short period payback times. And hoping that the previous content or session was clear and interesting for all of you, I will now get started with the next session. So let's delve a bit more in detail on what is the energy efficiency or energy efficiency key terms and concepts for the building envelope. Starting with the definition, what do I mean with building envelope, or what do we mean with building envelope? The building envelope is the physical separator between the interior and the exterior of a building. Components of the building envelope are typically walls, floors, roofs, fenestrations, and doors. And with fenestrations, we refer to any opening in the structure, such as windows, skylights, etc. A building envelope can serve many functions, or serves actually many functions, but it can be broadly, again, divided into three main categories. First, support, to ensure the strength and rigidity of the building by providing structural support against internal and external load forces. The next one would be control, so curbing the exchange of water, air, condensation, and heat between the interior and the exterior of the building. And third and last, finish. This is more for aesthetic purposes, to make the building look attractive while still performing the support and control functions I just mentioned. When defining the building envelope in the context of energy efficiency, it is also important that we distinguish between two terms, the building envelope and the thermal envelope. The building envelope is the physical separator between the interior and the exterior environment of a building, including air, water, heat, light, and noise transfer. Whereas the thermal envelope of a building is the union of those structures that separate the conditioned part of the building, meaning the space being heated and or cooled from the outside, or from the other parts of the building that are simply not conditioned. These two don't necessarily overlap throughout the building. So for example, in the building section I present in this slide, the roof represents the building envelope, and the thermal envelope is located below the roof, covering the last floor of the attic. But as you see, they do not necessarily overlap. Now, for purposes or for energy efficiency purposes, we typically focus on the thermal envelope concept, particularly when we're talking about HVAC systems. And what are the different layers that compose the building envelope? From an energy flow perspective, the envelope is the composition of layers with varying thermal and permeability properties. It might be composed of membranes, of sheets, of blocks, and other pre-assembled components. As you can see in the diagram of this slide, these layers offer a transition between the interior finish and the exterior one, including thermal, water, air, and vapor control. But also, as mentioned earlier, the building envelope layer should serve structural purposes, so in other words, building support. The choice of the envelope is governed primarily by the climate, the culture, and the available materials and resources that we have, but also on the use of that we want to give to that building, of course. Now, how do these different layers vary in different climates or in different weather conditions? Let's have a look at this at the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, and as it is the case of any energy efficiency measure, local conditions are the most influencing or even determining factors in developing energy efficiency building envelope components. In other words, a well-designed building envelope responds to the local climate. This slide shows three distinct extreme types of climates: arid, cold, and tropical. In each case, different building strategies can be implemented. So in this set, milder climates, not these three extreme climate types, on the other hand, can use milder versions of these strategies or a mix and match of these interventions. Now first, arid climates. These are very dry and usually hot, but they're often offer very large swings of temperature from day to night. Therefore, thermal mass on the outside of the building is the most crucial design strategy to even out, to balance out some of these temperature swings. Some of the design strategies are high ceiling, shaded breezeways, light colors, and daylight via reflected light instead of direct light. An example of this is the Masdar city to your left, constructed in the middle of the desert in Abu Dhabi, where they tried to, this is a very interesting example because they tried to combine both traditional construction practices in this sense with more innovative solutions. So that was indeed a very pioneer and interesting concept. Now, the next type of climate is the cold climate. These climates are characterized for having many more heating degree days than cooling degree days. Therefore, maximizing insulation is a key in keeping the building warm, as well as using windows for solar gain on thermal mass inside of the building envelope, unlike we saw in the arid climates. Part of having effective insulation in cold climates is airtight building envelope, avoiding any kind of infiltration. Also having small and very well selected openings. So in the Swedish cabin, you can see in the middle of this slide, you see that, well, it's a good example of this. It has very few and small windows, except to the south side, so you cannot see exactly the orientation, but we're looking at the south side of these facades to maximize solar gain while minimizing losses elsewhere. And finally, tropical climates. It is the case of many regions of East Africa, although I guess this might differ a little bit in high elevation areas for East Africa, but still in overall. Tropical climates are hot and humid. You will know this much better than me. Therefore, keeping the heat of the sun off the top is the top priority, as well as maximizing the ventilation. The ideal is a reflective insulated roof with walls that pass breeze, but not the rain. And the educational program or the school represented in this picture to your right shows the right color thatch roof, keeping out the sun heat away while opening eaves and porous bamboo slats for the walls and floors to maximize natural ventilation. The materials are all low mass to avoid condensation and mold growth. Now let's have a quick look at overarching building physics terms and concepts that are a bit boring, maybe, but absolutely necessary if we want to better understand how an energy efficient building envelope should look like and what are the different measures that we should be taking into account. Starting with the heat transfer. So heat transfer is the process of thermal exchange between different systems. Generally, the heat or the net heat transfer between two systems will be from a hotter system to a colder one. Heat transfer is particularly important in buildings for determining the design of the building fabric and for designing the passive and active systems necessary to deliver the required thermal conditions for the minimum consumption of energy and resources. Very broadly speaking, this mechanism or this heat transfer can be described as conduction, convection, and radiation. And seeing the results of the polls today, I'm sure that many of you, if not most of you, are very well acquainted with these terms, but still, let's go through them for the remaining part of the audience. So convection is the transfer of heat by moving air, like warm air, rising to the ceiling. Conduction is the transfer of heat through a solid material, such as a heat being transferred from a warmer section of the building to a cooler one. And radiation is the transfer of heat in the form of electromagnetic waves. So the warmth, for example, you feel when you're sitting close to a window on a sunny day. Heat tends to flow from higher temperatures to lower temperatures, as most of you already know, by these three mechanisms. And the rate of heat flow by any of these three forms is determined by the temperature difference between the two zone areas, considered the elements, but also considering the elements between them. The greater the temperature difference, typically, the faster the rate of the heat flow. Optimizing heat transfer through wall is crucial in energy efficient buildings. Thermal mass and installation with passive design strategies can substantially reduce the amount of energy that active systems such as HVACs need to operate. Resistance to conduction is measured by the R value. In this way, a high thermal resistance requires a high R value. The insulating performance is measured by the U value. And in this case, the lower the number, the better the installation performance. So as you can see, of course, and this makes sense, the U and R value are mathematical reciprocals, but both are important indicators when assessing the performance of a building envelope. But we need to have both in the back of our heads. As I mentioned earlier, The thermal mass of a building envelope helps to reduce indoor temperature swings and often leads to reduction in the size of mechanical heating and cooling system, HVAC systems, which is one of the biggest sources of energy and costs of the building. The basic premise is simple. As you can see in the figures to your right, the thermal mass absorbs the heat from the surrounded area when it is warm, and it radiates it back to the cooling or as cooling afterwards. Typically, this means that the mass is absorbing heat during the daytime, helping it to keep the space from overheating, and then re-radiating this at night, helping it or helping the space to be appropriately warm. If you have ever walked into a masonry building or monument during the summertime, for instance, I'm sure you felt this very pleasant temperature difference immediately when entering the building, and you realized there is no air conditioning inside. That's the phenomenon I'm talking about. So this natural ability of some materials, such as stone, to absorb heat produces multiple benefits to the occupants of the building. And when looking at different types of weather conditions, it is important to use these to our favor. Now, using thermal mass as a design strategy is a whole building approach. We could be discussing this for days probably. I will not delve too much into this, but let's take into consideration very general concepts. So the considerations that we should take into account is that related to the selection of the materials, the location, the orientation, the ventilation, and many other factors in order to achieve an effective, energy-efficient building envelope. To determine the thermal mass of the material, we have to know the volumetric heat capacity that material has, which can be found by multiplying or can be assessed by multiplying its density with its specific heat capacity. As you can see in this table, heavyweight materials such as concrete and brick have a high volumetric heat capacity and are therefore a building constructed with these materials would have a high thermal mass. On the other hand, lightweight materials such as timber and insulated panels will have a low volumetric heat capacity and therefore a low thermal mass. Now, looking at insulation. Insulation is a primary part of designing a building or energy efficient building envelope. It is designed to prevent the heat transfer for conduction and radiation through the thermal envelope. It is typically measured by emissivity, and the conduction is the dominant factor when materials are touching each other, and therefore when there is an air gap between the material, radiation becomes very important. Now, convection, on the other hand, usually only becomes an issue when significant air pockets are involved. Although insulation can be made from a variety of material, it usually can come in three main physical forms. One is the bedding or blankets. The next one would be the blown-on or loose fill, so-called. The next one would be foamed in place, also reflective insulation, and last would be the rigid board. When it comes to bedding or blankets, these come in the form of bats or continuous rolls that are hand-cut and trimmed to fit. They're typically stuffed into the spaces between the studs or the joints, which make the structure of the building, or at least of the building envelope. Benefits of this insulation are that they're quite common in many regions and quite easy to install. Next comes the blown-in or loose fill. This consists on loose fibers or fiber pellets that are blown into the building cavities using special pneumatic equipments. The best forms include adhesives that are sprayed within the fibers to avoid settling. The materials used are typically fiberglass, rock wool, or cellulose, and benefits are that it can provide additional resistance to air infiltration if the insulation is sufficiently dense. Reflective insulation, they consist of a roll of foil integrated into the house wrap or the wrap, or integrated into rigid insulated boards. These are kind of radiant barriers that are typically located in roof rafters, floor joists, or wall studs, again, related to the building envelope structure. And benefits are that it resists radiative heat transfer, and given that the resistance to heat flow depends on the heat flow direction, they are most effective in reducing downward heat flow. So radiant barriers are installed in buildings to reduce both summer heat wave and winter heat loss, and they're most effective in hot climates rather than in cold climates. Next one would be foam in place insulation. These insulation are sprayed directly into cavities within the building, where it expands and it sets to full seal the cavity. Typical materials would be polyurethane or related materials from the family. And benefits are that it can be fully seal the cavity, helping to reduce the air leaks. This spray foam that I mentioned, once it's set, it's rigid, and it can even provide some structural shear strength to the overarching structure. It generally has very high R values and also can provide acoustic insulation in case this is a good asset or a good benefit for the building. And finally, rigid boards. So these are plastic foams, extruded into boards or fibrous materials pressed into boards. It can also be molded into pipe covering or other three-dimensional shapes. So they're very useful, for instance, in piping for district energy, etc. This is the kind of material you would find in there. They provide both thermal and acoustical insulation, and great benefits on this is the fact that they're lightweight and they provide also structural support, so the same as foam in place, and generally have a high R value. Now moving on to glazing, and soon I'll be over, so bear with me. Good glazing properties are important because they control the amount and quality of light that enters the building, as well as the amount of solar heat gain let into the building, along with other factors. They very much determine the thermal and visual comfort of the space. So, the four most important properties of this material include thermal conductance, so measured in the U value that we explained earlier, the solar heat gain coefficient, which is the fraction of solar radiation admitted through the window, door, or skylight, or any opening, as I mentioned earlier, and the visible light transmittance. This is the amount of light in the visible portion of the spectrum that passes through the glazing material. And finally, the shading coefficient, which is the measure of the heat gain through the glass from solar radiation. And in this case, a lower shading coefficient will indicate a lower solar heat gain. This will be optimal in warm and sunny locations. That's why I'm highlighting it. Once again, an appropriate values for glazing and properties will vary based on the climate, but also on the size and placement of these openings. And there's no best kind of placement to use, but the appropriate according to the conditions and specific purposes. However, double and triple pane windows will always be encouraged for energy efficiency purposes, among other purposes, as I will see in the next slide. Moving on to what makes an energy efficient window. So 5 main characteristics can be highlighted. The quality of the frame materials, as they can reduce heat transfer and help insulate better the whole opening. Multiple panes, as I just mentioned, so 2 to 3 pane glass windows with a high air gas filled space in the middle will insulate much better than a single pane glass. For example, in Europe, single pane glasses are just obsolete, basically. Low E glasses, these are special coatings that reflect infrared light, keeping the heat inside in winter and outside in summer. Gas fills, so some of the, or most I would say, of the energy efficiency windows have argon, krypton, or other gases between the panes. These are odorless, colorless, and non-toxic gases, but will help to insulate better than normal air the window. And finally, warm edge spacers, which keep the window glass pane from the correct distance apart, or in the correct distance apart from each other. An energy efficiency window is usually a very low-hanging fruit in terms of the energy efficiency of a building envelope, as it has a very low cost and it can easily have a positive impact on the energy demand and therefore on the energy bill of the building. However, as I stressed before, and I will stress again, this will not be enough to make a building energy efficient. Another energy efficiency measure related to the building envelope is the shading and the redirection of the sun, especially in sunny climates. It entails an important set of strategies for visual and thermal comfort. Shading strategy includes overhangs, louvers, and vertical fins. On the other hand, light redirection strategies include light shells and buffels. So for example, in places like Copenhagen or in the Nordics, where we have a very limited amount of light, unfortunately, of sunlight, some old buildings even have some mirrors in the facade, hanging out of the facade to really try to reflect as much light as possible into the building space, interior space. And all these strategies can be external to the building or internal, and can be a fixed position or adjustable, all of them, the ones I mentioned. Some elements provide both shade and redirect the light at the same time. So some of these elements have been designed to address both at the same time, and others just address one of these elements as considered best fit. To select them, it is important that both thermal and visual comfort are considered simultaneously when designing them. Shades can keep heat and glare of direct sun from coming through the windows, while allowing diffuse light and views to enter. And they can also keep direct light off the walls or roofs to direct the cooling loads. Interior shades do not block the solar heat gain, but can also block the glare and even out the light disturbance. So as you see, depending on the specific purpose we want, we can play with the different elements and how to locate them and how to combine them for our own specific purpose, for our own benefit, let's say. So yeah, solar control and shading devices, these can be provided in a wide range of building components, including landscape features. This is a very important thing to mention. So nature or mature trees or hedgerows, like in the case of the Repsol campus I showcase here in Madrid in the picture to your left. So using nature to our own advantage in terms of the sun radiation. Also interior glare control devices such as venetian blinds or adjustable louvers, as I mentioned earlier, and this you can see to your right, but also low shading coefficient glass, as I mentioned earlier, that can also be a tactic or a strategy to keep the sun away. These are just some of the terms of concept needed to understand the fundamentals of energy efficiency in the building envelope. Yet again, as I mentioned earlier, and I would like to stress again, there are three main concepts that we need to bear in mind when addressing energy efficiency in buildings. Buildings, particularly when it comes to energy consumption, work as a system, so all components will need to take into consideration, and that is no exception when we're talking about the building envelope. Buildings are case sensitive. There is no single recipe that can serve all purpose buildings, and it very much will depend on local weather conditions, use of the building, local construction practices, and of course, resources, including budget. And third, but not least, buildings have a long lifetime, and this has the two consequences we mentioned. We should start implementing energy efficiency in buildings as soon as possible if we want to reach carbon targets, and we should do it properly by studying first the whole building to avoid any kind of blocking effect or suboptimal performance of its energy in the building, which is very much related to what my colleague Rahul will explain in a minute. And very briefly recapping before I wrap up this session. So the building envelope is a physical separator between the interior and exterior of the building. That is clear to most of us. And for energy efficiency purposes, we typically focus on the thermal envelope, especially if we're talking about or we're dealing with active systems, so HVAC systems, for instance. The envelope is a composition of layers with varying thermal and property permeability properties, and for tropical climate, which I guess is the focus or the interest of today, is the main features that could be included are to avoid solar radiation with some of the strategies I already mentioned, maximize ventilation through cross-ventilation, as also my colleague Jorge mentioned in his very nicely illustrated diagrams. Light-colored facade will also help low mass materials to avoid condensation. All these strategies we saw in the case of the school for tropical climate. Optimizing the heat transfer through the walls is important in high performance building design, and energy efficiency windows could be considered quality of the frame, multiple panels, low E-glass, gas fill, and warm edge spacers, to implement energy efficiency measures on the building envelope. Or, as I just mentioned, and I had mentioned earlier, all building elements and components should be taken into consideration, and the local weather conditions and resources should be studied carefully in order to implement the most suitable interventions. Having said this, thank you so much for your time and your attention. Any questions or comments beyond the Q&A session that we will have later on, don't hesitate to contact me in the email I share here below, or visit our website. And this said, thank you very much. And I leave the floor to you, Rahul.
Okay, so thank you, Clara, for your presentation on the building envelope. It was quite detailed and informative. I will be mostly supplementing, complementing, continuing with the details regarding the energy audit and management for the buildings. Hello everyone, I am Rahul Dusa. I will be presenting the topic on the energy audit and management for buildings. It is a large topic. I have a number of slides. I believe it's almost lunchtime for you now, and also one of the most challenging times to actually present. That is, holding attention of all hungry audience, but please bear with me. It should take about 25 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes, and I'll be done. The polls in the beginning was quite informative. It was good to see about 76% of the audience were aware of of what energy audit and energy management is. However, there is still a larger section of organizations or the audience in the webinar today that who are yet to have proper energy management systems in place and to get energy audits done. So yes, still enough. There is enough potential on energy savings to be tapped. I also appreciate the fact that about 42% of the audience today actually perform energy audits. So I'm hoping that they are mostly energy auditors or energy managers or related experts. So the presentation will be briefly touching about two aspects here, considering the time frame what we have. One, what it takes to, we would be understanding what it takes to have a proper functioning energy management practices in place, and number two, what goes on during the energy audit. So in addition to the consultants and the energy managers out there, it is also important for the building management personnel and other stakeholders who are usually the beneficiaries of all these processes and studies. Basically because it gives them a sense of understanding on the works and challenges the experts or the auditors would be going through when they visit your facilities to conduct such studies. So yes, looking at the polls, this presentation may be quite basic for some of them and slightly complex for those who are not aware of this topic. So if you want to understand something different or something more or discuss something else related to this topic, please do write to us. We can direct you to suitable sources available on the website, or we can directly interact with you also. So diving into the topic, when you talk about buildings, we have seen quite a large variety of buildings, what Clara was mentioning. You have different types of buildings and each building serves a particular purpose. So we will see how energy audits are conducted and how these are how the energy management is adopted for the buildings. Usually the approach is covered for a larger variety. there might be some exceptions which needs to be dealt case to case specific, but what we discussed today would be covering or applicable for largely all varieties of buildings. So before getting into the topic, it's a customary practice to look into or revise the definitions first. Energy management, it's a simple definition, but what I would want you to focus on or emphasize on is the fact that it mentions that we minimize the energy costs, and without affecting quality, comfort, and production. This is something which we need to keep in mind. Often there are questions, it can be something, taking some actions at the cost of something else. That is not generally recommended when you do energy management. You should not compromise on the quality, comfort, and production or any of your operations to minimize your energy costs. Further, moving on to the what energy audit is, a simple definition. It's about a systematic approach for decision making in the area of energy management. This way, you see, it is linked to energy management. My favorite definition would be the third one, the bigger one. I would say it is more detailed. In addition to the technical and cost benefit analysis, it also specifically includes the terms monitoring, verification, reporting, and an action plan. So basically, it's not just about doing some analysis and moving out of the facility. You, as a client, you need to ensure that the energy auditing team or the energy expert also suggests you or supports you with all these factors, with respect to the monitoring part and verification part and providing you with action plan and all. So let's get into the energy management of buildings first. There are four main factors that for a successful energy management system in place. Technical ability, it is about something like does your organization have technical abilities to understand the energy terminologies? Do you have enough knowledge about what kind of systems are there in place, passive, active, something about, let's say, HVAC systems or the envelope, what we were talking about. Monitoring systems in building could be about the following the energy consumption trends. Do you have proper lighting levels or the occupancy levels? Are the HVAC systems functioning properly? So all these things come under monitoring. And then moving on to the strategy for plan for the buildings, it's something more or less similar to what the approach what we have discussed day before yesterday, that is in module 1.3 part 1. Of course, the components to be dealt with will have to be customized for a building, and finally, management support is quite inevitable to initiate anything, right? So further, as we dive into the details, it is important to have management's commitment and support. So basically, something like appointing some qualified building energy manager, or are they do they have a well represented energy team that is formed? I believe most of you by now understands the importance of a team composition. So I have also discussed earlier in our last session this basically that how important it is to have energy policy in place, because this is something which guides everyone to towards energy efficiency. And then energy performance assessments, it is about monitoring your data. Do you have proper control systems in place? How are you collecting the data? How are you monitoring it? How are you evaluating it? So you will be required to set up a baseline, and that's nothing but what is my present energy consumption levels? What are the different technologies that I have with respect to the appliances, the spaces, or the applications? Then you would be evaluating the energy metrics such as energy performance indexes, like for the buildings, kWh per meter square on an annual basis. There is also something which you need to look for is the benchmark figures as a reference, because until you see some reference point, you would not be moving forward. You will not have anything to compare yourself how you are performing, right? So you need to have some benchmark figures in place. And depending on the type and the location of the building you have, appropriate benchmarks would generally be set. All this evaluations and of EPIs and efficiencies are generally done through energy audits and technical assessments, and hence that is why, as we checked into the definitions earlier, energy management is linked to energy audits also. I mean, it is requirements. Once you set up your EPIs, metrics, baseline, benchmark, and all, you would be defining the scope and goals. So, based on the recommendations from the energy audits or the technical assessments, you would be assigning roles and responsibilities for your staff, for the building personnel, to have an action plan. For implementation to be successful, you will be definitely needing to have a clear communication, creating awareness, if need be, conduct capacity building training programs. So progress evaluation, at some point you have to evaluate if the plan that you have charted or if the course you have taken is actually on the right track. So for which you may have to measure certain parameters again and again, refer to your initially set benchmarks, compare your baselines, compare where you are now, and take corrective actions. So this is a brief about energy management and different components that we've discussed. Any details you want, we can discuss further over emails or during the question sessions. Moving on to the energy audit, it's classified into two different types: preliminary audit and detailed energy audit. The detailed is again further classified into pre-audit phase, audit phase, and post-audit phase. Yes. So let's take an example to understand the preliminary energy audit here. It's basically I'm taking an example for a municipal scale of buildings. A municipality plans to improve energy efficiency in the building sectors. And when you talk about a municipality level, the region would be having hundreds of buildings, and there could be of different types and purpose. So obviously, one would first target the low-hanging fruits, or target the ones which have the highest potential savings first to initiate the energy efficiency drive. And how do you end up with the information? You do a quick preliminary energy audit studies based on maybe for the buildings, preferably picking up sample sets of the buildings under each type, and then consolidate your collected energy and related information. Ideally, the recommended approach would be first to understand the metrics of all these buildings that you have collected the data for, and assessing what is the potential energy reduction. So I'll quickly go through the steps of the preliminary energy audit. First, you would be establishing the energy consumption. That is, the energy audit teams who would be visiting and quickly collecting the energy data. The data would not be in much depth, but basic assessments like energy consumption values, what is the meter cube of gas consumption if required, the building establishment area, something like that. So based on these basic data that is collected, they define the energy performance index and the metrics that are defined. Based on this, the major energy consuming areas are identified. Usually they would be HVAC systems, lighting systems, depending on the type of building and the purpose that it is being used for. Next comes the scope for savings and that are estimated based on the type of energy used, the type of equipments involved, the technology, condition, age. The auditor or the auditing team would be estimating the potential scope for energy savings. Easiest areas for attention are identified, that is the low-hanging fruits. Something like as simple as if they might identify some number of low energy labeled air conditioning units, then the potential would be to the potential of savings will be calculated by estimating on replacing it with higher energy label rating air conditioning units. What would the potential be? Something like that, or something like if installations of potential installations of occupancy sensors or indoor lighting and ventilation, or photo sensors or timers for the outdoor lighting. So these are different low-hanging fruits that are generally looked into. In-depth studies that are required are identified and noted, but generally these are something like which may need further more detailed simulations for evaluating or estimating the heat loads and cooling loads and all. This is noted at this stage. It is not generally done or taken up at a preliminary energy audit level. And then finally, they would set a reference point. It is about where the building or the facility actually stands on that moment or that particular duration or time with respect to the energy profile. So with this as a reference, the municipality can move forward to understand which particular type of buildings they need to target, or which specific components they might have to target. I think one of the bases where you find worldwide many are targeting cooling programs, or specifically targeting energy efficiency replacement, motor efficiency programs and all. So these are something which are actually identified at an individual scale, then they are coupled and made it into a bundle. We did discuss about project bundling this morning, right? So yeah. So one thing I would like to emphasize here is you should note that preliminary energy audit uses existing or easily obtained data. No heavy measurements are done at this phase. So yes, this is an example of how data consolidation is done. Type of buildings, how many numbers are there, would fill, what is the energy consumption, what is the potential savings, and based on these summarization of the data, the municipality can take a call on what next course of action would be. So that was preliminary energy audit, and then for detailed energy audit would be moving are actually very detailed. I will try to give out the best and the maximum information in the time that is available with us. So first, let's see what are the different instruments. These are some of the instruments I'm taking this opportunity to introduce to you in this slide, what generally the energy auditors use for their field measurements and assessments on site. So this is generally a flow meter that is used to measure chilled water flow rates or cooling water flow rates, for example. This is a power analyzer which generally is used to monitor power parameters of the building. It could be kWh or kVA or harmonics, everything, kVAR. There are a number of parameters that come under the electrical parameters. Yes. This is a thermograph which is used for identifying heat gains or heat losses via the windows or doors or damaged insulations or air ducts and so on. I will quickly follow a 10-step approach. The slides will be available for your thorough reference later. Step 1 is about actual pre-audit phase. The effectiveness of this step actually defines how successful and smooth your rest of the audit goes. So you plan and organize you plan and organize basically what needs to be done. You carry out referring to you, that is the energy auditor here. The energy auditor would be carrying out a walkthrough audits, have informal interactions, not so detailed, but to understand an overview of the building setup and installations. Interaction with the building manager or the facility manager will generally be required at this stage. This phase is important because it helps you in planning resources such as time, team, instruments, etc. Generally, the auditor would be possibly sharing a questionnaire likely to collect some important information, useful information during this phase. Every parameter that I mentioned here in the sample tables that I've shared you now are quite important and not to be neglected. This is an overview of energy sources to have an idea on the types of energy used, the quantum, the cost of the energy used, and some type of major energy consumption points. Some more technical data with respect to the energy sources, like what are the charges and the unit charges and power factor and all these things. Some technical data on electrical systems and transformers. So I'm just giving you samples where you'll have an idea of what kind of data the auditor is looking for, and further we would see how it can be utilized to assess and analyze. This is something a questionnaire would have for HVAC systems. Finding out what are the type of what are the capacities, the models, the type, and the energy consumption on an annual basis. Likewise, similarly, for the auditor would be collecting basic data on numbers, types, usage, capacities for all the equipment, the components like fans, blowers, lighting systems, building envelope components through the questionnaire. So based on the data that the auditor collects, energy auditor collects, he will be having an idea on the size of the building, the complexity and the time that it would take to complete the energy audit study. So they would accordingly plan for their instruments, resources, like I have shown you in the table. Like they would have an idea of what all instruments are required, numbers, and for what purpose. And then they would also plan for the professionals or the experts in the team that would be required to complete the study. The team would also finally prepare and share the plans, the timelines to the management, because to ensure that the management allocates a supporting staff for the said date and time. So it is mentioning which particular category will be covering which areas on which days. So that specific, for example, if someone's wanting to cover some electrical systems, then the management can assign someone who's responsible for the electrical systems to that particular expert or the auditor on this day. And yes, a tentative work plan that is shared based on the data that is collected and the understanding that the team has until now. Moving on to step 2, the auditing team conducts a brief meeting with the divisional heads, the management, the concerned personnel, basically to discuss timelines, seeking cooperation, additional information from everyone. It is important because everyone is on the same page from the start, and the facility will be well prepared to coordinate with the energy audit team. For step 3, you move into the actual audit phase now, wherein the auditing team will be collecting some primary data for historic analysis to set a baseline. The data can also be, related to design and operating data, operating schedules, something like number of shifts in which the personnel operate. The data is generally taken from manuals, log sheets, or nameplates. Primary data can be something like flow diagrams or utility or line diagrams, energy bills and all. Some of the focused categories that are mentioned are here. So it can be as simple as collecting data about location, latitude, elevation and all, and as complex as, getting into too technical terms of window specifications or equipment specifications and all. Step 4, it is in-depth survey and monitoring will be done in individual areas of the building. So the auditing team would be comparing their first-hand data that was collected, the design data or the operating data that was collected through the questionnaire responses. So why comparison? It's because more often when the data is bulk data is forwarded to the auditing team, is generally done through some old files or folders which the facility manager or the employee would already have. So before proceeding into the full-fledged measurements and all, it is a due diligence process where the auditor would be looking into the details, comparing what is presented earlier to them on a paper is what exactly there on the field or no. Then this need not be an exclusive step. Generally, this is merged with step 5. So in order to save time and all. some of the questions that the auditor would be asking, to identify. Basically, it's more of an interactive and interactive basis where there's a lot of conversation that happens to identify what are the potential areas. Uh, because most of the times it so happens during the interactions you get to know, you understand a lot more about the topic here, about the facility, because the auditor is actually coming from an external agency or external source. uh, Someone coming from outside uh, trying to recommend the owner of the building or the owner of a firm is quite challenging, right? So they first need to understand what is the system about. Uh, this is an example for the detailed design parameters that are generally collected for during the in-depth survey. So earlier it was only for about up to model capacity and type, but further you look into the temperatures and the flows and all these specifications. Step 5, the auditing team will start conducting detailed measurements, experiments, trials on energy intensive areas. They would be monitoring parameters, what is the maximum demand, what is the power factor, what is the kWh and all. Study the load variation trends, measure and evaluate performance parameters. It could be for pump efficiencies or heating and cooling loads, how they are varying throughout the day or throughout the process or throughout the week or a month. So basically, at this step, detailed performance evaluation is done. Efficiency trials are done through various measurements. We will see some of the performance assessments in detail for HVAC systems in the next session, next upcoming presentations. So I am showing you some example of how the meters are connected to. This is a power analyzer, power analyzer or load analyzer, which is connected to the panels to capture the live or dynamic or on a dynamic basis, live real-time energy consumption data, different parameters. And this is again a real-time measurement of the flow of chilled water at one of the facilities for a chilled water pipeline of a chiller. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is about measuring the air flows through large air handling unit ducts. Again, to evaluate the performance of the air handling units, to evaluate the performance of the chillers and all. So yes, I am showcasing an example for a transformer loading and operational trials for a building. This is just for an example for informative purpose, not to be applied for individual buildings here, because every building or every facility is unique and the operations would be unique, and the same approach may not be followed always. So yeah, the power analyzers were connected to the panels, the data was recorded and analyzed, and here the case is about parallel operations trials of the transformers. So basically, it was recommended here to distribute the load of the both the transformers. So if you see initially the initial scenario was one transformer was heavily loaded and the other transformer was not much loaded. But looking into the criticalities of the system and all, it was further decided to uh, distribute the load equally for the two transformers. And having done that, generally, why was it suggested? Because it would partially reduce the load losses in the process. So if you see total losses calculated is reduced after the proposed scenario. So yes, now if someone would directly randomly suggest or recommend you to do this, it would be quite a tough task, because one, you would not be confident enough to simply believe someone recommending you something, right? It is, so that is one of the reasons why measurements are important. You show the numbers, you show the live changes or the variations that are happening based on your recommendations, and the plant or the building or the facility would be very much confident and or accepting the proposals. This is another sample on how the trials are done, how the data is beautifully represented, so that everyone can understand in graphical terms rather than shooting some simple Excel sheets and all. It's important. The data is collected, so it is important to also represent the data in a well manner, so that everyone is able to understand and when during the decision making process. This is generally for the harmonics that were recorded to the power analyzer and displayed here. Another example is one of the facilities we were conducting trials and monitoring the performances for the chillers. So that is evaluating the cooling load, specific power consumption at different time points. So this way you will understand at what time how the chiller is performing and what is the loads variations of the facility. So based on that, you will have a better understanding of what actions need to be taken during specific time of that day. On the right here, there is another example of analysis shown for a pump that was operating with variable frequency drive. So here, if you see, trials were taken to evaluate the pump efficiencies at different operating frequencies. So these were the different operating frequencies, and you see the overall efficiency of the motor system varies. And then also, what are the different flow variation happening in the system, in the pump motor system or the pipelines at different frequencies. So based on this, the facility was able to identify what was the actual flow requirements, and operating at what frequency they were able to fix what a particular frequency of operation for these pumps, so that they don't consume more energy, or they don't because if you operate at 50 hertz, the power consumption is slightly higher. If you operate at a lower frequency, power consumption comes down. But another challenging part would be if you really go into very low frequencies, then the head developed would be minimal, so it would not be effective enough to push the water to the source, to the user end. So it needs to you need to have an optimization in place, and having such detailed analysis and data, you will be able to optimize or point out where at what operating point you want to operate your systems. Step 6, a detailed analysis further on energy use will be done. Generally, this is about having some energy and material balances that needs to be prepared. It gives you an idea about the share of energy consumed from different sources and the share of energy consumed for different outputs. In a way, you will have an idea on what are the different losses also that are going out. So in case you find higher losses at a specific category, then you would be informed. You would be taking an informed decision to target which areas you want to actually work on. So generally, these are done through having some energy material balances or through Sankey diagrams to understand the gains and losses. But on a simpler side, you can also have analysis as simple as this, that is simple electrical consumption values for different sections, for let's say how the energy or the electrical consumption varies for HVAC systems or for lighting systems throughout the week or throughout the month. This particular analysis for a specific one of the facilities we've conducted is quite interesting, because if you see here the data shown, I see on Saturdays the HVAC energy consumption was significant. But when you actually, practically, if you see the building actually has holidays on Saturday and Sunday. So which would come out, which would actually trigger to the next question that if it is a holiday, why the air conditioning loads are increasing during Saturdays? So this is some of the questions that can come up, some of the thought processes that can come up, and further you can push yourself into investigating the matters. Another simpler form of analysis or detailed analysis would be having as simple as a pie diagram or distribution loads, basically, so you'll have an idea on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. You can have this and then compare how the percentages are varying then accordingly you'll have you'll decide what needs to be done. If on a specific month my HVAC loads are increasing more than this value as on today, then you will be encouraged to look into the facts why it is increasing. Are there any specific additional loads that have come up into the system, or are there any inefficiencies that have creeped up into your system? Step 7, basically the auditor would be developing proposals on the energy conservation opportunities, and he would be listing down based on each area and all. And then the ideas will be consolidated, it would be refined, it would be discussed with the operators first, the facility managers, the management. Once everyone agrees and is in common consensus, I think they would be contacting the vendors, the suppliers, or technology providers, so that if required, for the procurement of any desired technologies, new energy efficient technologies, materials or equipment. Based on the interaction with the vendors or the suppliers, you would be having an idea of what the cost for investment would be. The auditors would also provide you the calculations of what is the energy savings and cost savings. So based on that, you can evaluate what is the payback periods, and you prioritize based on your short-term periods, or short-term measures, or medium-term measures, or long-term measures. So I'm showing another example here wherein the consolidated values for energy conservation measures in and energy cost saving potentials for electrical systems here. This is only a sample. It need not be limited to only 4 what I'm presenting here. There can be many varieties. And then here, this is another example for HVAC systems. So based on your payback calculation periods and all, if you see in the last column, you can actually decide which measures you want to immediately take up, which energy conservation measures you want to allocate certain budget and plan to take up in future. If you see, for example, I would be targeting the measures 1, 3, and 4, which are immediate and which barely need any investment. So why would I want to wait further? Now, if I know that I will be able to achieve something by taking action now, I'll be doing it. And then some measures like technology upgradations and all, where the investment can be slightly higher. You can discuss with your management and allocate sufficient funds and take up in budget, and you implement them in the future. Reporting and presentation to the top management. Well, the auditing team finally has to conclude at some point and will be preparing a detailed report, which would be containing the different types of data that has been recorded, the calculations, the technical and economic assessments, the detailed proposals and justification for those proposals and recommendations. A formal closing presentation would be done to the top management, and because they are the final decision makers, right? And this is the last step. As mentioned earlier, a good and reliable energy auditor or the auditing team would further assist the facility in implementation of energy conservation measures that were recommended. So it also depends on the agreement conditions between the firm, the energy auditing firm, and the building management regarding the post auditing phase activities. But I would highly recommend this, that you take the support of the energy auditor during the further post audit implementation activities also, so that everyone is accountable for their parts. It's not just that someone comes, recommends, and goes away. It'll serve no purpose. So yeah, when you start an audit, you have to make sure that the whoever is recommending you the measures and all, they need to stick with you. If not implementing them, at least supporting during the implementation, reviewing the technical data and all. So yes, I can actually go on for hours on this topic, but again, as we discussed earlier, the time is also important resource. Nevertheless, further discussions, queries can for discussions and queries, please do write to me in the email mentioned here, or you can also pose questions here. I'll come back to the for other topics, and I would open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul, for a very thorough presentation. Now I would like from our attendees to respond some poll questions regarding today's topic. And we'll start with the first one. Do you think it is a good idea to implement energy efficiency measures in buildings? So I'll give a few seconds to respond. And now let's see the results. Yep, as expected, all of you agree with that statement that it is a good idea to implement energy efficiency measures. Now, the next question that we would like to ask you is, would you be willing to take action to take building in your municipalities, to make buildings in your municipalities more energy efficient? And obviously the options is yes, no, and I don't know. Okay, let's see the results of this question. And yeah, 96% said they agreed with that argument. And the question is, how would you assess your level of knowledge of energy efficiency measures in buildings? High, medium, low, no knowledge on energy efficiency measures in buildings. Again, I will give a few seconds to respond to that question.
And the results are 75% responded medium, 17% responded low, 8% responded high, and nobody responded to the final option.
Now we will do the Q&A session. And the first question is for you, Jorge. And the question is, what is the process for requesting assistance for project bundling?
Thank you very much for the question. Well, actually, the process is just to contact us, I would say, and we can discuss the way we can help you in doing project bundling. So, I mean, we are at your service, and it's just to contact us specifically on project bundling. You can contact myself. I think my email address was in the on the presentation itself. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you very much, Jorge. And now that you're online, I have another question for you. And the question is it not better to bundle the energy efficiency interventions with respect to building thermal mass to us state utility vs municipality? Or is this part of the synergy you would promote as a special purpose vehicle?
Yeah, well, I mean, whichever way is I guess is possible. I mean, the SPV model that I presented is something that we have tested, and it has worked very well in Argentina, as you will see in the last day of this course. But of course, I mean, there are other options, as I also mentioned, and I mean, is the important thing in this aspect is that you have someone that is sort of coordinating and acting on behalf of a number of project owners. So everything is conducted in a more a smooth way and more economically efficient way. So it's yeah. I mean, there are other possible options.
Just to complement what Jorge mentioned, given that it was related to the thermal mass and therefore to the buildings. Well, first of all, completely agree with what Jorge mentioned. It very much depends on the case. But when talking about thermal mass, of course, we're talking about a specific aspect of the building, and this is, I mean, it depends on the scale or number of buildings you're addressing, but this is, of course, you can discuss with utilities, you can discuss with any other, let's say, energy suppliers to that end. But at least from our understanding or our experience with project bundling, you're not typically addressing one sole aspect of one sole building. When we talk about project bundling, it's typically trying to bundle together different aspects of the energy efficiency upgrade of the municipality, of the building, not just one particular component of one particular sector. Again, as Jorge mentioned, it's very case sensitive, so it could be that for the case of your municipality, that is indeed an option to make a bundle project on that. But we would encourage, however, to have a look at the other sectors, at the other aspects of your city, of your municipality that you could upgrade energetically, and maybe it is interesting for the utilities or any other type of investor or capital provider or whatever it is that you're including in the multi-purpose vehicle or special purpose vehicle, and see if that, including these other aspects, would be interesting for them to make that case a bit more attractive to them. That would be just building up upon what Jorge already mentioned.
Thank you very much, Jorge and Clara, for your intervention. The next question that I have is for you, Rahul. And the question is, what is the process of accessing funds to conduct energy audits in municipalities?
Okay. I mean, first option would generally be to have self-funding, which is mostly, most of the municipalities who are rich in cash would continue doing that, because when the moment you look into the funding aspects, you have to see that, you have to understand that through the audits, you would be saving a lot of energy. I mean, once you implement this, and you would eventually get your returns back from whatever you have invested or whatever funds you have paid as a consultancy charges for the auditors and all. So that is one thing. Two, there are time to time several programs, funding programs and all, who would be conducting such, who would be giving funds on the basis of investment grade audits, which are called. Mostly you come across with these development banks or something like UNIDO and all these organizations. They time to time they come up with proposals, top programs wherein they target municipalities and all, or regions, or even a state level, wherein they promote investment grade audits, wherein they give initial seed funding to carry out the energy audits. But by the end of the time, they also look into the fact that how much of the investment grade measures are identified and how they are taken forward by through different soft loans and all these aspects. So it is quite linked. This is the two main possibilities which fundings are dealt with. Another opportunity could be, to have energy auditing firm or the consultants with a binding or a savings or a guaranteed linked agreements, wherein they come, they invest themselves, they do the audit work, or they identify, implement and all, and based on the savings that are actually achieved, the municipality can decide to pay them for what the work that they have done. So that way, no one is at a loss, and things would be moving smooth.
Thank you very much, Rahul. And I have another question. It's again for you. How can you convince conservative owners of buildings on reliance to energy conditioning system in their buildings?
This is one of the challenging tasks which even I faced during most of my field works or measurements or during auditing times and all. So it is consistent perseverance, I would say. It all boils down to the convincing skills one would have. So I mean, that is one method, wherein being nice and showcasing the different examples of successful stories and all, so that they would be tempted, or they would be convinced that yes, this is something which actually works. It has already been implemented, so why not? They can also move ahead in adopting those. And two, giving them incentives. Like I think most of the European countries that I've seen, there are incentives paid by the municipality wherein if a particular building, even as something as residential sector also, if you become a bit more efficient, that is, you invest in some efficient equipment and all, you get kind of a subsidies or some refunds, something like that, from the municipality back to your account. So depend from the municipality or from the utility, depending on who is running the scheme. So yes, this is another aspect of convincing owners of the buildings in consuming the in opting for efficient measures. And last but the most effective, I would say, is having a policy, a regulatory framework wherein you make it mandatory that efficient systems have to be in place. So yeah, it depends on which kind of a regulator you are, and how you want to deal with your people in the municipality. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Indeed, it's a very challenging topic to convince the owner to take energy efficiency measures. With that, I would like to inform everybody that we received many questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Already we exceed the agreed time for this e-training. We will share all the questions with my colleagues, so if they would like, we can contact with you in order to respond to your question. And with that, I would like to thank the panelists for the detailed responses to the questions. And the next question will be held in 3 days. As you can see here, you will receive an automatic reminder 1 day and 1 hour prior to the broadcast. So I would like to say thanks to the panelists for the informative and interesting presentations, and to the audience for their active participation. We hope that the presentation will be beneficial for all stakeholders involved in energy efficiency. Thank you for your attention, and wish you a good day from Copenhagen.